The scent of 1,000 white roses choked her each petal, a thorn in her heart. From the shadows of a centuries-old cypress tree, 8 months pregnant and utterly alone, Isabella watched the man who was still her husband slip a diamond onto another woman's finger. He was a millionaire, a titan of industry, and he was publicly humiliating her in the most lavish way imaginable. But Julian didn't know the secrets she kept the silent vows made to her in rooms he could never enter. He thought she was a broken little bird. He was about to find out she was the storm. The wedding was a spectacle of obscene wealth, a carefully orchestrated performance set against the breathtaking backdrop of the Villa d'Este on the shores of Lake Como. Tourists on the ferryboats paused, their cameras flashing, trying to capture a glimpse of the fairy tale. But for Isabella Rossi, hidden away in a secluded grove, it was the final glittering nail in the coffin of her marriage. Her husband, Julian Vance, a man whose name was a synonym for power in the world of international finance, was marrying his mistress, Serafina Dubois. The irony was a bitter pill. It was here, in this very garden, under the same ancient wisteria, that Julian had proposed to her 3 years ago. He had called her his anchor, his quiet strength, the one pure thing in his gilded, chaotic world. Now she was just an inconvenient truth, a swelling belly that marred his perfect new picture. Isabella rested a hand on the curve of her stomach, where their son, their unborn child, kicked gently, as if sensing his mother's distress. She had begged him, pleaded with him when he'd first confessed his affair and his intention to marry Serafina. "Think of the baby, Julian," she had whispered, her voice raw, with a pain so deep it felt physical. "He deserves a family." Julian's response had been cold, clinical. "I will provide for him, Isabella. He will have the best of everything, but I will not be shackled to a loveless marriage." Loveless. The word had echoed in the cavernous, minimalist penthouse they once shared, a space now stripped of her presence, her books, her art. Had it always been loveless for him? Had the quiet evenings, the shared laughter, the nights she'd spent soothing his anxieties when a deal went sour, all been a figment of her imagination? From her vantage point, she could see him clearly. He was devastatingly handsome in his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. He leaned in to whisper something in Serafina's ear, a gesture so intimate, so familiar, that it stole the air from Isabella's lungs. Serafina, a willowy former model with eyes the color of ice, threw her head back and laughed, the sound carrying across the manicured lawns. She was everything Isabella wasn't. She was fwa and flash, her public persona, as curated as her Instagram feed. Isabella was quiet, introspective, a woman who found solace in rare books and rainy afternoons. Julian had once claimed to love that about her. "You are my peace," he used to say. Now it seemed he craved chaos. The press was there in droves, a veritable army of photographers and reporters, held back by a velvet rope and a platoon of security guards. They called it the wedding of the year. The headlines were already written: "Billionaire Julian Vance weds socialite." Serafina Dubois in Italian paradise. Her own existence, her status as his legal wife, was a footnote he was ruthlessly trying to erase. His lawyers had sent her the divorce papers 2 weeks ago, offering a settlement that was generous by any normal standard, but insulting in its implication: take the money and disappear. Be a good, quiet girl. She hadn't signed them, not out of hope for reconciliation, but out of a stubborn refusal to make this easy for him. Her lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Marcus Thorne, had advised her to wait. "We have leverage, Isabella. The pregnancy is public adultery. Don't fold yet." But watching them now, seeing the triumphant smirk on Serafina's face as she flaunted the colossal diamond, a gaudy monstrosity that eclipsed the elegant sapphire Julian had given her, Isabella felt her resolve crumble. What was the point of fighting? He had already won. He had the world at his feet, the woman he wanted on his arm, and the power to silence any inconvenient truths. A gust of wind rustled the leaves of the cypress tree, a sudden chill in the warm Italian air. Dark clouds were beginning to gather over the mountains on the far side of the lake, a stark contrast to the brilliant sunshine bathing the wedding party. It felt like an omen. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a single discreet vibration. She pulled it out. It was a message from an unsaved number, but she recognized it instantly. "Patience, Principessa, the cavalry is coming." Isabella's breath hitched. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks, a spark of defiance ignited in her chest. She looked back at the wedding, at the man who was erasing her, and for the first time that day, a genuine, albeit faint, smile touched her lips. Julian thought he knew everything about her. He knew Isabella Rossi, the quiet art historian from a modest family. He had no idea who Isabella di Sforza really was. And he had no idea that the silent allies she had cultivated, the powerful figures from a life he never knew existed, were about to descend on his perfect curated world like a gathering storm. The first drops of rain began to fall fat and cold, spotting the dark silk of her maternity dress. The performance was about to begin. The ceremony reached its crescendo. The officiant, a man whose face was familiar from celebrity magazines, pronounced them husband and wife. A roar of applause erupted from the guests, a symphony of the rich and influential, celebrating the union of power and beauty. Julian dipped Serafina in a dramatic kiss, a move clearly designed for the cameras. It was a perfect shot, a moment of manufactured passion that would be on the cover of every tabloid by morning. For Isabella, watching from the shadows, the sight was a physical blow. The last vestiges of the woman who loved Julian Vance died in that moment. The pain that had been a constant dull ache for months sharpened into something cold and hard and clear. It was no longer just grief. It was resolve. She had to leave. To stay any longer would be to let the humiliation consume her whole. Holding on to the rough bark of the cypress for support, she turned to make her way back to the small, inconspicuous car she had parked on a side street. But as she turned, she saw them. Julian and Serafina walking hand in hand, not towards their reception, but directly towards her grove. A small entourage, including Julian's best man and Serafina's maid of honor, trailed behind them, champagne flutes in hand. Panic flared in Isabella's chest. He couldn't see her like this, swollen heart broken a ghost at his feast. She tried to shrink back further into the shadows, but it was too late. Julian's eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before it was replaced by a mask of cold fury. "Isabella." His voice was low, menacing. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Serafina clung to his arm, her expression a perfect blend of feigned concern and malicious triumph. "Oh, Julian, darling, look. It's your ex." She let the word hang in the air, a deliberate sting. "I didn't realize you'd been invited." The small entourage behind them fell silent, their eyes flicking between the regal new bride, the furious groom, and the heavily pregnant woman in the shadows. The air crackled with a tension that was more dramatic than any staged ceremony. "I wasn't Isabella," said her voice surprisingly steady. She met Julian's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm still your wife, Julian, in the eyes of the law, if not in your heart. I thought I should witness the moment you committed bigamy." A gasp rippled through the small group. Julian's face darkened. "Don't be ridiculous. The papers have been filed. You were sent a generous offer. It's your own fault for not signing." "Generous?" Isabella laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You call that generous a pittance to erase 3 years of my life, to buy my silence while you parade your infidelity for the world to see." My darling Serafina interjected, her voice dripping with saccharine pity. She stepped forward, her white gown pristine against the darkening grass. "You're making a scene. You're clearly overwrought. It's the hormones, I imagine." She glanced pointedly at Isabella's stomach. "Julian has offered to take care of you. Of it. You should be grateful." The dismissive wave of Serafina's hand towards her unborn child was the final cut. The carefully constructed dam of Isabella's composure broke. Grateful Isabella stepped out of the shadows, her presence suddenly commanding. The rain was falling more steadily now, clinging to her dark hair, but she didn't seem to notice. "Grateful that my husband is attempting to discard me and his own son like a corporate asset that's underperforming. Grateful that he's replacing me with you. A woman whose only notable achievement is climbing her way out of obscurity by sleeping with other women's husbands." Serafina's face flushed an ugly red beneath her perfect makeup. "How dare you, I dare, Isabella," said her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than all their shouts. "You have no idea what I dare." She looked at Julian, her eyes boring into his. The love was gone, replaced by a chilling disappointment. "I came here today to see for myself what I was losing. And I have. I see a weak man, so terrified of his own heart that he surrounds himself with shiny, empty things to feel powerful. And I see a woman so desperate for validation, she'd build her happiness on the ruins of another's." Julian took a step forward, his hand raised as if to silence her. "That's enough, Isabella." "It is," she agreed, pulling her gaze away from him as if he were no longer worth her attention. "It is more than enough." She turned her back on them, on the gasping guests, on the man who was the father of her child. As she began to walk away, her steps slow and deliberate, the heavens seemed to open. The gentle rain transformed into a torrential downpour. Thunder cracked overhead, a sudden violent sound that made Serafina shriek and cower against Julian. But Isabella didn't flinch. She kept walking, her head held high, the rain plastering her dress to her body, outlining the defiant swell of her belly. She was walking away from her old life, a sodden, solitary figure against the backdrop of a ruined society wedding. Julian watched her go, a strange, unreadable expression on his face, a flicker of doubt or just annoyance that his perfect day was being upstaged by a pregnant woman and a thunderstorm. As Isabella reached the edge of the villa's grand iron gates, the distant purr of an engine grew louder. It was a low, powerful sound, the kind of sound that announced the arrival of not just wealth, but of consequence. A pair of headlights cut through the deluge. A car, long, black, and impossibly sleek, pulled to a silent stop directly in front of her. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a vehicle that cost more than the average person's house, its black paint gleaming like wet obsidian in the stormy afternoon. The rear door opened with a quiet, expensive click. An umbrella, also black, unfurled, held by a chauffeur in a flawless uniform. He held it over Isabella, shielding her from the downpour as if she were a queen. From inside the car, a figure leaned forward. Isabella paused, her hand on the open door, and glanced back. Through the sheets of rain, she could just make out Julian and Serafina, standing frozen on the lawn, their perfect wedding dissolving into a chaotic, muddy mess. They were staring, confused and wary, at the impossible sight. Who was Isabella Rossi? The quiet, discarded wife. The penniless art historian. As the first black car waited its engine, a low, patient thrum. The answer began to announce itself. Julian Vance was about to learn that the woman he had tried to erase was more powerful than he could ever have imagined, and her allies, the ones who had just arrived, did not play by his rules. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was a cocoon of silence and luxury. The chaos of the storm instantly muted by layers of soundproofed glass and supple black leather. The air smelled of old money and authority. Seated opposite her was a man Isabella had not seen in person for 5 years, though his influence had been a quiet, constant presence in her life. He was Alessandro Vincenzo, her godfather. To the world he was a recluse, a legendary figure in European finance, the so-called kingmaker, who operated from the shadows, his wealth so vast and old, it made Julian Vance's fortune look like a rounding error. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, piercing grey eyes that missed nothing, and a face that looked like it had been carved from Tuscan marble. He was family, not by blood, but by a bond forged in loyalty and secrets long before she had ever met Julian. Alessandro. Isabella breathed a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her. He reached across the space between them and took her cold hand in his warm, dry one. His touch was firm, paternal. Mia cara Isabella. My little principessa, did you think we would abandon you? Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in front of Julian now welled in her eyes. I didn't know who else to call. You did not need to call. We have been watching, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. We gave Mr. Vance enough rope to hang himself. It seems he has fashioned a rather elaborate noose. His gaze flickered past her out the rain-streaked window, towards the villa where Julian and his bride were now being ushered inside by frantic staff. He is about to learn a very old, very important lesson. The Sforza name is not to be dishonored. Isabella flinched at the mention of her family name, the name she had shed when she married Julian, hoping for a simpler, anonymous life. Sforza. A name that carried the weight of centuries of Italian nobility, of power brokers, patrons of the arts and figures who had shaped the destiny of nations from behind the scenes. She was descended not from modest art historians, but from one of the most powerful and discreet dynasties in Europe. A fact she had deliberately hidden from Julian, wanting to be loved for herself, not for her connections. It had been a naive, romantic dream. He never knew, Isabella said quietly, wiping a tear from her cheek. I wanted a life away from all that. A life that was just mine. And you deserved that, Alessandro said, his expression softening. But you chose a man who understands only one thing, power. He mistook your humility for weakness. He mistook your independence for isolation, a fatal miscalculation. The chauffeur closed the door, and the car began to move, gliding away from the villa, with a silent, imposing grace. As they passed the main gate, another car, a black Mercedes Maybach, pulled in behind them, and behind that, a black Bentley flying. A formidable procession was forming a funereal parade for Julian Vance's life as he knew it. "Who is in the other cars?" Isabella asked, her curiosity piqued through her exhaustion. "Allies," Alessandro said simply. "Family. People who owe your father a debt of honor. People who understand that when one of us is threatened, all of us respond." He gestured to a small, built-in refrigerator. "Some water." He poured her a glass of San Pellegrino, the iconic green bottle, a small, familiar comfort. He then poured himself a small glass of something amber. "Now," he said, taking a sip, "tell me everything, and do not spare a single ugly detail. Marcus Thorne has handled the legal preliminaries, but the real response begins now. We will be surgical, we will be swift, and we will be merciless." Isabella took a deep breath. For months, she had been drowning her story, unheard, her pain dismissed. Now she had the ear of one of the most powerful men in the world. She began to speak, her voice gaining strength with every word. She told him about the subtle dismissals, the gaslighting, the way Julian had slowly isolated her from the few friends she had made in his world. She told him about the discovery of the affair, the brutal confrontation, his cold-blooded proposal to Serafina while she was still living in their home, pregnant with his child. Alessandro listened without interruption, his grey eyes turning to flint. He was a man of few words, but his stillness was more intimidating than any outburst. When she finished, the silence in the car was heavy, profound. "He took your shares in Vance Industries as part of the prenuptial agreement." "Correct," Alessandro asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Yes," Isabella confirmed. "He said it was a formality. He put them in a blind trust managed by his board." Alessandro smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "His board," he mused. "Let's talk about his board. Robert Chen, head of Asian markets. His company was on the brink of collapse in 2008. Your father personally guaranteed a loan that saved him, a loan he never called in." He ticked off a finger. "Lady Annalise Beaumont, British aristocrat with impeccable connections. Her family's estate was about to be seized for back taxes. A word from your uncle to the right people in Parliament made that problem disappear." He ticked off another finger. "And my personal favorite, Javier Morales, the tech guru from Spain. A brilliant mind, but he had a youthful indiscretion involving some rather sensitive government data. Your cousin, the one who works in intelligence in Rome, made sure the file was permanently buried." Isabella stared at him, stunned. She knew her family was influential, but the scale of their reach, the intricate web of favors and debts, was something she had never truly comprehended. 3 of the 7 board members of Vance Industries, Alessandro continued, his smile widening, owe their entire careers, their very freedom to the Sforza family. They have been waiting for a call, for a chance to repay that debt. I believe that call will be made tonight, before Mr. Vance and his new bride have even finished their wedding cake." He leaned back against the leather. "He wanted to erase you, Isabella. Instead, he has made you visible to us again. He has reminded us of our obligation to you. By the time the sun rises over Lake Como tomorrow, Julian Vance will find that the empire he built is a house of cards. And we," he said with a final chilling finality, "are the wind." The convoy of black cars did not head for an airport or a hotel. Instead, it wound its way up a steep private road, deep into the hills overlooking the lake, a region tourists never saw. They passed through an ancient stone archway, unmarked and unadorned, and arrived at a sprawling, secluded estate that had been in the Sforza family for over 400 years, the Villa Falcone. The Falcon Villa. It was not a place of opulent display like the Villa d'Este, but one of quiet, unassailable power. It was Isabella's childhood home, a place she hadn't returned to since her mother's funeral. As the Rolls-Royce crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway, the doors to the villa swung open. A staff of familiar, loyal faces greeted her, not with pity, but with a quiet, fierce respect. Benvenuta. A casa principessa, the elderly butler, Massimo, said, his voice thick with emotion. Welcome home. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of beeswax and old stone. The men from the other cars were already there, gathered in the grand library, a 2-story room lined with priceless books and dominated by a massive, centuries-old fireplace. They were the allies Alessandro had spoken of, a formidable assembly of power. There was Kenji Tanaka, a Japanese industrialist whose quiet demeanor belied a ruthless business acumen. His father had been saved from a hostile takeover by Isabella's grandfather. He bowed deeply to her. Isabella-san, it is an honor to stand with you. Next to him stood Sheikh Rashid Al-Jamil, a member of a powerful Emirati royal family whose investments controlled significant portions of the global energy market. He had attended Oxford with Isabella's older brother, and they were bound by a friendship that transcended business. Isabella, he said, his voice warm, but his eyes hard. Tell me what you need. It is yours. And then there was Elena Petrova, a woman who looked more like a Bond villain than a businesswoman. Sharp, elegant, and notoriously brilliant, she was the CEO of a global private security and intelligence firm. Her connection was the most personal. Isabella's mother, a renowned philanthropist in her own right, had rescued Elena from a trafficking ring in Eastern Europe when she was just a teenager and funded her education. Elena owed her entire life to the Sforza matriarch. He will not know what hit him, Elena said, her Russian accent clipping her words with precision. My teams are already in place. We have been running passive surveillance on Vance Industries for the past 48 hours. We have found irregularities. Many irregularities. This was the true nature of her family's power. It wasn't just wealth. It was a global network of loyalty, a tapestry of debts of honor that could be called upon at a moment's notice. Julian had tried to humiliate a woman he thought was alone. He had, in fact, declared war on a dynasty. Alessandro took his place at the head of the massive oak table. Friends, he began. Thank you for coming. Our purpose is simple. We are here to rebalance the scales. Julian Vance has committed an offense not just against Isabella, but against the honor of our collective houses. He turned to a large screen that descended silently from the ceiling. Elena, if you would. Elena Petrova stepped forward, a tablet in her hand. With pleasure. An organizational chart of Vance Industries appeared on the screen. As we know, Vance's empire is built on 3 pillars: finance technology and luxury real estate. It appears strong, but it is over-leveraged. He has been using creatively, and I use that word generously structured debt to finance his acquisitions. He's been shuffling assets between shell corporations to hide losses and inflate his company's valuation. She swiped the tablet, and a complex web of transactions appeared on the screen, flowing between entities in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Liechtenstein. My forensic accountants have found the pattern. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, albeit a very sophisticated one. He uses the influx of capital from new investors to pay off the old ones, all while siphoning millions into his personal accounts, like the one used to pay for today's theatrical production. Isabella felt a chill. She had always known Julian was ambitious, even ruthless, but she had never imagined he was a common criminal dressed in a bespoke suit. The key, Elena continued, is investor confidence. His entire empire is built on his reputation as an infallible financial genius. If that reputation were to crumble, if his key investors were to pull out simultaneously, the entire structure would collapse within hours. Sheikh Rashid leaned forward. My sovereign wealth fund has a significant position in his latest tech venture. We were planning on doubling our investment next quarter. He smiled thinly. I believe I will be instructing my fund managers to divest. Immediately, citing a loss of confidence in senior management. Kenji Tanaka nodded. My corporations supply the rare earth minerals for his tech division. I foresee significant, unavoidable supply chain disruptions starting at midnight Tokyo time. It would be a tragedy. Alessandro turned his gaze to Isabella. And the board members I mentioned earlier, Robert Chen, Lady Annalise Beaumont, Javier Morales, they are waiting for one call. They control 40% of the voting shares, enough to call an emergency meeting and force a vote of no confidence, enough to authorize an independent audit, which, thanks to Elena's work, we know will be devastating. He slid a satellite phone across the table to Isabella. The call should come from you, Principessa. Isabella looked at the phone, then at the faces around the table. They were not acting out of pity. They were acting out of a shared code of honor that Julian, in his arrogance, could never comprehend. He had broken the rules of their world, and this was the consequence. She picked up the phone, her hand steady. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about protecting her son's future from the toxic legacy of his father. It was about reclaiming her own name. Put Robert Chen on, she said, her voice clear and strong. While she made the calls one by one, methodically dismantling the board that supported her husband, Eleanor projected another image onto the screen. It was a live feed from a high-powered surveillance camera aimed at the grand ballroom of the Villa d'Este. The party was in full swing. Julian and Serafina were dancing, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. They looked happy, triumphant. Julian raised a glass of champagne, no doubt toasting to his new life, his new wife, his perfect future. In the quiet library of the Villa Falcone, surrounded by her hidden allies, Isabella watched him on the screen. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a character in a movie, a man she used to know. The man on the screen was a fraud, and his world was a fiction. The first alert came to Sheikh Rashid's phone. A single discreet buzz. He glanced at it. The markets in Asia will open in 1 hour, he announced to the room. My sell order has been placed. It will be the first trade of the day, a multi-billion-dollar divestment. It will trigger every automated alert system in the financial world. Elena smiled. And my anonymous tip, complete with a starter package of incriminating documents, has just been delivered to the desk of the top financial investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal. Her name is Catherine Miles. She is famously tenacious. Alessandro Vincenzo raised his glass of amber liquid. To new beginnings, he said, looking not at the screen, but at Isabella. Isabella nodded, a feeling of grim, resolute power settling over her. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. Outside the storm over Lake Como had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible clarity filled with stars. But for Julian Vance, The real storm was just about to hit. The first sign of trouble at the wedding reception was subtle. A senior aide approached Julian, whispering urgently in his ear, while he was in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech. Julian's smile tightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He waved the aide away, determined not to let anything spoil his moment. But a few minutes later, another aide appeared, this one looking pale and frantic. He thrust a tablet into Julian's hands. On the screen was the pre-market data from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Vance Industries, VNC, was in free fall, a catastrophic vertical drop of 60%. The cause was listed as a massive, unexpected sell-off from a major institutional investor, the Al Jamil Sovereign Wealth Fund. Julian's blood ran cold. He excused himself abruptly, leaving a bewildered Serafina on the dance floor. He rushed to a private study, his top financial advisors already patched in on a frantic conference call. Panic laced their voices. "What the hell is going on? Why would Rashid pull out?" "I just spoke to his people last week," Julian roared into the phone. "We don't know," his CFO stammered. Their official statement just hit the wires. A sudden and total loss of confidence in VNC's executive leadership and financial transparency. "Julian, this is a disaster. It's triggering a cascade. Every hedge fund is trying to short us." Before he could process the first blow, his phone buzzed with a news alert. It was from the Wall Street Journal. The headline was a dagger to the heart. Vance Industries' House of Cards leaked documents suggest massive fraud, SEC investigation likely. The article was brutal, meticulous. It detailed the shell corporations, the inflated assets, the very creative accounting methods Elena's team had uncovered. It didn't make outright accusations, but it asked pointed, devastating questions, quoting anonymous sources deep within the European financial sector and close to the Vance Industries board. It was signed by Catherine Miles. "Get our PR team on this. Kill the story, sue them," Julian yelled, sweat beading on his forehead. "We can't," his head of communications squeaked. "They're not alleging, they're just reporting on leaked documents. It's airtight journalism. And, Julian, it's already been picked up by Reuters, Bloomberg, and the AP. It's everywhere." Then came the final fatal blow. An email landed in his inbox with the subject line, "Emergency Board Meeting Notification." It was from the office of Lady Annalise Beaumont. The meeting was scheduled for 1 hour from now. The agenda, a vote of no confidence in the CEO, and a motion to launch a full independent forensic audit of the company's finances. The motion was co-sponsored by Robert Chen and Javier Morales. Julian stared at the names. Chen, Beaumont, Morales. It was impossible. They were his staunchest allies, men and women whose loyalty he had taken for granted. He had built his board to be a rubber stamp, a collection of powerful people who owed him. Or so he thought. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. This wasn't a random market fluctuation or a negative press story. This was a coordinated attack. It was an execution. His mind raced, searching for the source, the architect of this symphony of destruction. And then, like a ghost rising from a grave, the image of Isabella walking away in the rain, her head held high, flashed in his mind. He remembered the impossible arrival of the black Rolls-Royce, the quiet dignity that had replaced her grief. Her final words, "You have no idea what I dare." It couldn't be. Isabella, the quiet, unassuming art historian, the woman he had plucked from obscurity. How his office door burst open. It was Serafina, her face a mask of rage and confusion. "Julian," What is happening? My father just called me. He said, "Your stock is worthless." People are leaving the party. Everyone is on their phones. They're looking at us like we're criminals. Get out. Serafina. Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. What? Don't you talk to me like that. I am your wife. A title that will be worth precisely nothing by morning. He snarled, the full weight of his ruin crashing down on him. This is all her fault. Isabella. Serafina stared at him bewildered. Isabella. What could she possibly have to do with this? She's a nobody. A nobody. Julian laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. We are fools, Serafina. We are absolute, complete fools. He had been so blinded by his own perceived brilliance, so dismissive of the woman he had married, that he had never once thought to look into her past beyond the superficial story she had presented. Who was she? Who were her people, who arrived in black cars to spirit away a discarded wife? The world he had built, the empire of glass and steel and digital code, was shattering around him. The calls were coming in a relentless flood. Lenders were pulling his lines of credit. Business partners were invoking termination clauses. The SEC had already announced a formal investigation. It was over. In the space of a single wedding dance, he had gone from a titan of industry to a pariah. Back at the Villa Falcone, Isabella and her allies watched the fallout on the screen in quiet satisfaction. They saw the news reports, the plunging stock tickers, the photos of panicked guests fleeing the lavish wedding reception. They saw Serafina arguing with her father on the phone, her fairy tale wedding dress now looking like a foolish costume in the face of utter financial ruin. Then Elena put a new image on the screen. It was a live feed from the security cameras outside the private study at the Villa d'Este. They watched as Julian, looking like a cornered animal, made a call. "We have audio," Elena said. Julian's voice, strained and desperate, filled the library. "Marcus. Get me Marcus Thorne." There was a pause. "What do you mean he's no longer representing me?" "He can't just quit. On whose authority?" "Isabella's." The phone clattered as Julian dropped it. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. He was utterly, completely alone. His own lawyer had defected. Alessandro Vincenzo turned to Isabella. Her face was calm, resolute. There was no glee, no triumphant celebration, just a profound, quiet sense of justice being served. "He will try to contact you," Alessandro said. "He will beg. He will threaten. He will promise you anything." "It won't matter," Isabella replied, placing a hand on her belly. "This was never about money. It was about respect. The respect he refused to give me or our son." She looked at the powerful figures assembled around her, and the respect he showed to no one. The final piece of their plan was yet to come. It was the most personal, the most cutting. Elena brought up another file on the screen. It was a dossier, complete with photographs and financial records. Serafina Dubois. Elena announced. While she was seeing Julian, she was also continuing a long-term affair with a certain aging Swiss banking tycoon, a man who happens to be one of Julian's primary business rivals. More interestingly, she has been feeding this rival information about Julian's business dealings for the past 18 months, for a very handsome fee. Sheikh Rashid let out a low whistle. So the viper in his bed was also a spy. "We will leak this tomorrow," Alessandro said. after his financial ruin is complete. It is important that he understands the full scope of his failure, that the woman for whom he destroyed his family was in fact an architect of his downfall as well. He looked at Isabella. A final poetic justice. Isabella gave a single slow nod. The humiliation would be absolute. He had traded a diamond for a shard of glass, and now he would be forced to see it. He hadn't just been outplayed. He had been a fool, and in his world there was no greater sin. Dawn broke over Lake Como with a cruel, painterly beauty. Ribbons of rose and gold bled across the sky, reflecting on the placid water, mocking the utter chaos of Julian Vance's inner world. He stood on the grand terrace of the Villa d'Este, not as a triumphant groom, but as a king surveying the ashes of his kingdom. The air, which 24 hours ago had been electric with applause and champagne-fueled laughter, was now heavy and still thick with the funereal scent of thousands of wilting white roses and stale, spilled alcohol. The silence was the most damning indictment of all, a profound cavernous emptiness where adoration used to be. His world had not just collapsed. It had been systematically, brilliantly, and silently dismantled in less than 12 hours. He had spent the night in a state of escalating panic, a caged animal rattling the bars of a prison he hadn't known existed. His frantic calls to bankers, to board members, to politicians had been met with a chilling uniform wall of silence. Voicemails went unreturned. Aides who once jumped at his shadow now sent terse, formal emails of resignation. He turned on a television in one of the suites only to see his own face staring back from a financial news program. A panel of sharp-tongued analysts were picking apart the bones of his empire with a kind of gleeful, clinical precision. They used words like hubris, house of cards, and a textbook case of narcissistic overreach. They showed a picture of him and Serafina from the wedding, their triumphant kiss now looking like a grotesque prelude to a tragedy. Then they flashed a picture of Isabella, a candid shot from years ago looking thoughtful and serene. The question everyone is asking, the anchor said, is who is the woman at the center of this storm, the quiet wife who it seems held all the cards? The story of Serafina's betrayal was the salt in the wound. It had broken online in the early hours of the morning, a sordid little tale of corporate espionage packaged for maximum humiliation. He could picture it perfectly, her whispered secrets to his rival over candle-lit dinners, her dismissive laughter about his ambitions behind his back. The woman for whom he had torched his life hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been a willing saboteur, another architect of his ruin. She had vanished before midnight, after a venomous argument in which she had accused him of deceiving her about the stability of his wealth. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. He was truly, utterly alone. A pariah, adrift in the wreckage of a life he had designed. It was in this state of absolute desolation that he saw it a single, unremarkable black sedan purring up the long driveway. It was not a car of a friend or an associate. It lacked the ostentation of his world. It was a vehicle of purpose, of grim function. A man in a simple, well-tailored suit emerged, his face impassive. He wasn't a chauffeur or a bodyguard. He was a messenger. He walked directly up to Julian, handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope and said, "From the office of Marcus Thorne." Then he turned and left his job complete. Marcus Thorne, his own lawyer. The bulldog he had paid a fortune to be his shield was now apparently a sword aimed at his throat. His hands trembled as he broke the wax seal which was stamped not with a law firm's logo, but with the intricate crest of a falcon. Inside were the divorce papers. They were not the papers he had sent Isabella. These were a different beast entirely. The language was cold, precise, and absolute. It was not a negotiation. It was a decree. He scanned the first few clauses, a flicker of incredulous hope sparking within him. She wasn't contesting the prenup. She was claiming no portion of his fortune, no alimony, no settlement from his now worthless stocks or frozen accounts. For a delirious second, he thought it was a mistake, an act of foolish, wounded pride. Then he turned the page to the addendum titled Reclamation of Premarital Assets of Isabella di Sforza Vance. Sforza. The name he had heard Alessandro Vincenzo speak in the library at Villa Falcone. The name that now seemed to seethe on the page. He began to read, his blood turning to ice. The list wasn't the modest collection of art, and the small inheritance he had condescendingly logged when their prenuptial agreement was drafted. It was a portfolio of such staggering scale and strategic importance that the air left his lungs. He saw a controlling interest in a Congolese mining conglomerate that held the exclusive rights to the cobalt that was essential to Vance Industries' tech division. He had spent 2 years aggressively negotiating that supply chain, never knowing he was negotiating with his own wife's ancestral holdings. He saw the deed to a vast tract of land in the UAE, the very land upon which Sheikh Rashid Al Jamil was building a multi-billion-dollar refinery, a project partially funded by a loan guaranteed by Vance Industries. The loan was now collateral against her land. The list went on and on. There were seed capital funds that had financed the very tech startups he had later acquired for a premium. There were trusts that owned the patents for key logistical software his empire relied upon. It was a web of power, silent and invisible, that had underpinned his entire ascent. He hadn't been a king. He had been a glorified manager, a court jester playing with the Queen's gold and thinking it was his own. His genius had been in leveraging assets she had quietly placed in his path, and he had been too arrogant, too blinded by his own reflection, to ever ask the source of his good fortune. The final pages were the most devastating. It was the custody agreement for their son. The language was surgical. It stripped him of all legal claims. No parental rights shall be granted. No contact shall be permitted. The child's surname will be Sforza. A trust funded exclusively by the assets of the mother will provide for the child's welfare and education in perpetuity. Julian Vance will be treated in the eyes of the law as a sperm donor with no further role. He was erased. The very act of annihilation he had intended for her had been turned back on him with a finality that was absolute. He had tried to discard her and his son, and in return her ancient, powerful family had stripped him of his company, his reputation, his legacy, and even his fatherhood. Miles away, bathed in the gentle morning light, Isabella stood on a sun-drenched balcony at the Villa Falcone. She wore a simple white linen dress, her hair unbound, her face serene. She was a world away from the weeping, broken woman who had hidden in the cypress grove. Alessandro Vincenzo joined her, handing her a cup of steaming herbal tea. "It is done," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "He has received the papers." "And the company?" She asked, her gaze fixed on the tranquil horizon. "The board has accepted our offer. Marcus Thorne proved very persuasive," Alessandro said with a thin smile. "Through a series of proxies, the Sforza Consortium will acquire the salvageable assets, the tech patents, the infrastructure for a fraction of their worth. We will absorb them, cleanse them of his corrupt practices, and fold them into our own enterprises. We will build something stable, something honorable." He paused, looking at her with paternal pride. It will form the basis of a new legacy, a birthright for your son, a testament to his mother's strength. Isabella placed a hand over her swelling belly, where a gentle flutter reminded her of the future she now commanded. This had ceased to be about Julian long ago. It was about this life, this innocent child, who deserved to be born into a world of honor, not into the shadow of a disgraced man. Her phone buzzed softly on the stone balustrade. A message from Elena Petrova. It contained a single high-resolution photograph taken from a distance. It was Julian crumpled on the steps of the Villa d'Este, the cream-colored envelope in his hand. He looked hollowed out, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own party, small and utterly defeated against the grandeur of the setting. For a moment she looked at the image of the man she had once loved, the man who had caused her such profound pain. She felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no triumph. Only a vast, quiet distance. He was a chapter from a book she had already finished reading. With a simple, deliberate motion of her thumb, she deleted the image forever. He no longer warranted even a flicker of her attention. Below in the gravel driveway, the black Rolls-Royce Phantom waited its engine, a low, patient hum. Massimo, the butler, stood by the open door. It was time to leave. This was not an escape but a progression. She was not returning to a life of hiding, but stepping into her role as the head of her own house, the guardian of a dynasty. As she walked towards the car, her steps were not those of a victim. They were the measured, confident strides of a queen, leaving the chaos of a foolish man's war behind her, turning her face towards the calm, clear horizon of her own making. The past was settled. The future was hers to command. That's the story of how a single act of betrayal awakened a sleeping giant. Isabella's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her power, her name, and her destiny from a man who saw her as nothing more than an accessory. It's a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the deepest roots and the strongest allies. Julian Vance thought he was the king of his world, but he was merely a pawn in a much older, much grander game. Isabella didn't just win. She rewrote the rules and took the entire board. A penthouse overlooking Central Park, a walk-in closet overflowing with Hermes, and a baby on the way. Anya had it all. Or so she thought. In the blink of an eye, her billionaire husband, a man who once promised her the world, stood before her, his words colder than the winter wind whipping across their panoramic window. I want a divorce. But before the ink could dry on the papers, a knock on the door changed everything. His mistress wasn't there to gloat. She was there to expose a secret so dark it would make his demand for a divorce the least of Anya's worries. The scent of blooming peonies and old money filled the air of the penthouse apartment on the 82nd floor of 432 Park Avenue. It was a sterile, curated scent, one that Anya had come to associate with her life, beautiful, expensive, and utterly devoid of the earthy reality she secretly craved. From this height, New York City was a glittering, silent diorama. The yellow cabs were ants, the sprawling green of Central Park, a manicured carpet, and the people, the millions of bustling, striving souls, were entirely insignificant, just like her. Anya traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the stark minimalist decor Julian insisted upon. Everything was shades of grey chrome and glass. It was the home of a man who admired his reflections both literal and financial. He called it uncluttered. Anya called it empty. Her hand drifted down to the gentle swell of her stomach a 6-month bump that was her only true possession in this sky-high palace. This baby, her baby, was the one vibrant, chaotic, and real thing in her life. It was a secret garden she nurtured within herself, a world away from Julian's meticulous control. Julian Croft. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a visionary in the volatile world of tech mergers and acquisitions. His face, all sharp angles and disarming smiles, graced the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He had a Midas touch, turning fledgling startups into billion-dollar unicorns with a flick of his pen. He had swept Anya off her feet 5 years ago. She was a junior art curator, then full of opinions and passion, and he had seemed utterly captivated by her spirit. He'd courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that leave a woman breathless, a private viewing at the Met, a weekend trip to Paris, on a whim a rare first-edition book of poetry she'd once mentioned in passing. He had built a gilded cage for her, and she, dazzled by the shine, had walked right in. She'd given up her small gallery job, her cramped but cozy apartment in the village, and her circle of wonderfully messy artistic friends. Julian had said he wanted to give her the world. She hadn't realized he meant he wanted to become her entire world. The sound of the private elevator chiming its arrival pulled her from her reverie. Julian was home. Early. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach, a feeling that had become increasingly familiar over the past few months. He strode into the living area, looking every inch the master of the universe. His bespoke Tom Ford suit clung perfectly to his athletic frame, his dark hair was impeccably styled, and his face held the neutral, unreadable expression he reserved for high-stakes negotiations. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the panoramic view as if calculating its net worth. Julian Anya began, her voice softer than she intended. "You're home. I was just about to have the chef start on dinner." He turned then, and the coldness in his eyes extinguished the small flicker of hope in her chest. There was no warmth, no flicker of recognition for his pregnant wife. It was the look he gave a line item on a balance sheet that was underperforming. "Don't bother," he said, his voice flat and clipped. He walked over to the marble bar and poured himself a whiskey, the clink of the decanter against the glass unnaturally loud in the silent room. "We need to talk, Anya." Anya's hand instinctively went back to her belly, a protective gesture. "Is everything all right? Did the deal with the Japanese consortium fall through?" She tried to grasp for a familiar topic, a corner of his life she was still permitted to understand. He took a long swallow of his drink, his throat bobbing. "The deal is fine. Everything in my life is perfectly aligned. Except this." He gestured vaguely between them, an all-encompassing wave that dismissed their 5 years of marriage. Their shared bed, the child growing inside her. This, she whispered, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. This marriage, he stated, turning to face her fully. His face was a mask of detached finality. "It's run its course. It no longer serves its purpose. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, sharp and deadly, like shards of glass from the panoramic window he so admired. Anya felt the blood drain from her face. She must have misheard. This was Julian's idea of a joke, a cruel, power-playing jest to see her squirm. "A divorce," she stammered, a hysterical little laugh escaping her lips. "Julian, what are you talking about?" "I'm pregnant. We're having a baby." "I'm aware of the child's existence," he said, his voice laced with an icy patience that was more terrifying than any shout. "My lawyers have already been instructed to be generous. A trust will be established for the child. You will be provided with a settlement that will allow you to live very comfortably. A nice apartment, a staff, whatever you need. You will want for nothing materially. Materially. The word was an insult, a deliberate reduction of her life, her love, her very being to a transaction. The man who had once quoted poetry to her was now liquidating her like a bad asset. I don't want a settlement, Julian. I want my husband. I want the father of my child. Her voice cracked the carefully constructed composure of the perfect wife, shattering into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. What has happened to you? What has happened to us? Nothing has happened, he insisted, his calm unwavering. He was a stone wall, impervious to her pain. This was always a contract, Anya. An arrangement. You provided beauty, social grace, a certain aesthetic. I provided a lifestyle beyond your wildest dreams. The contract is now being terminated. A contract. She stared at him aghast. The last 5 years replayed in her mind, now tainted and twisted by his cruel words. Every shared laugh, every tender touch, every whispered promise now felt like a lie, a performance. She felt a wave of nausea so profound it had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She had been a fool, a beautiful, well-kept, blind fool. There's someone else, isn't there? The question was a classic, a cliché she never thought she'd utter. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. Not guilt, but a flicker of annoyance, as if she were a fly buzzing around his head. That's irrelevant to the situation. Irrelevant? She cried, her voice rising. You're throwing me out pregnant with your child, and you tell me your mistress is irrelevant. Who is she, Julian? He walked over to the sleek obsidian desk in the corner and pulled a thick document from a leather briefcase. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table between them. The sound was a final, definitive thud. These are the divorce papers, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. My lawyers advise you to sign them without contest. A prolonged, messy battle will not be beneficial for you, or for the public's perception of you. I have a reputation to maintain. He was threatening her. He was threatening to paint her as a gold digger, a shrew, to drag her name through the mud, while he stood pristine on his mountain of money. The cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was trying to erase her, to control the very narrative of her existence, even as he expelled her from his. She looked from the papers to his cold, handsome face. The man she loved, or the man she thought she loved, was gone. In his place stood a monster, a creature of pure, unadulterated avarice and ego. A profound, chilling clarity washed over her. The shock receded, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar anger. No, she said, her voice trembling, but firm. Julian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. No. I will not sign these. I will not be discarded like one of your failed investments. This child, she said, her hand protectively cradling her belly, deserves a father. And I deserve an explanation. A real one. Julian's jaw tightened. He was not used to being told no. The air crackled with his silent fury. He took a step towards her, his physical presence suddenly feeling overwhelming, threatening. You are making a grave mistake, Anya, he hissed. You have no idea what you're messing with. You have no idea the forces at play here. Sign the papers. Take the money. Disappear quietly. It's the best option for everyone." His words held a hidden weight, a darker undercurrent that went beyond a simple sordid affair. The forces at play here. It wasn't the plea of a man in love with someone else. It was a warning, a threat. Before Anya could respond, before she could decipher the strange, panicked glint in his eyes, the chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse once more. Both their heads snapped towards the sound. Julian's face, for the first time that evening, lost its composure. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his features so quick that Anya almost missed it. He looked trapped. "Who is that?" Anya asked, her own confusion mounting. They weren't expecting anyone. Julian guarded their privacy with a zeal that bordered on paranoid. "Don't." Julian breathed his eyes wide as he stared at the elevator doors. It wasn't a command to Anya, but a desperate plea to the universe. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft, expensive sigh. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with raven black hair cut into a sharp, severe bob, and eyes the color of emeralds. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, bloody slash of color in the monochrome world of Julian's penthouse. Anya's heart stopped. It had to be her. The mistress. She had come to gloat, to witness the final destruction of the wife to claim her prize. Anya braced herself for the humiliation, the final crushing blow. But the woman's eyes weren't on Anya. They were locked on Julian, and they held no trace of triumph. Her beautiful face was pale. Her hands were trembling, and her emerald eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored the panic on Julian's face. She took a shaky step into the room. "Julian," the woman, said, her voice a ragged whisper that cut through the silence. "It's over. They know. They know everything." Julian stared at her, his mask of control utterly shattered. He looked like a man staring at his own ghost. Anya looked back and forth between her husband and this beautiful, terrified stranger. A cold dread far deeper and more terrifying than the pain of betrayal began to creep up her spine. This wasn't about a simple affair. Julian's strange warning, his panic, this woman's fear, it was all connected to something far bigger. The divorce papers lay on the table, forgotten. The gilded cage had just burst open, but Anya had a sickening feeling that she hadn't been set free. She had just been tossed into the fire. The woman in the crimson dress took another hesitant step into the cavernous living room. Her designer heels, which should have clicked with authority on the polished marble floor, were instead unnervingly silent, as if she were trying to retract her own presence. Anya's mind, still reeling from the whiplash of the divorce demand, struggled to process this new bizarre tableau. The mistress, for who else could she be, wasn't acting like a victor. She was acting like a fugitive. "Isabel. What the hell are you doing here?" Julian finally managed to say, his voice a strangled rasp. He shot a venomous glare at her, a look that was less about a spurned lover and more about a co-conspirator who had broken rank. He moved almost unconsciously to position himself between Isabel and Anya, a futile attempt to control the flow of information. "I tried to call you Isabel," said her voice trembling. She ignored Anya completely, her gaze fixed on Julian's increasingly frantic expression. "Your phone was off. I left a dozen messages with your secretary. I had to come. We don't have any time." "Time for what?" Anya interjected, her voice finding a new steely edge. The initial shock was beginning to curdle into suspicion. "Time to coordinate your stories before you throw me out." Isabel's head snapped towards Anya, and for the first time she seemed to truly see her. There was no malice in her emerald eyes, no smug superiority. Instead, Anya saw a flicker of something that looked unnervingly like pity. It was an expression that infuriated Anya more than any taunt could have. "This has nothing to do with your marriage," Isabel said, with a dismissive wave of her hand that was so absolute it was chilling. "That's just collateral damage. A loose end he was trying to tie up." A loose end. Anya repeated the words, tasting like ash. She looked at Julian, whose face was now a ghastly shade of pale. "Is that what I am to you, Julian? A loose end?" "Shut up!" Isabel Julian roared, finally losing the last vestige of his icy control. He lunged towards her, grabbing her arm. "You shouldn't be here. We had a plan. The plan is shot to hell." "Julian." Isabel wrenched her arm free, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of anger. "The plan went up in smoke the moment my brother's name appeared on the SEC's inquiry list this morning. The acronym hung in the air, SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The federal agency that policed Wall Street, the boogeyman of every high-flying financier. It was a name Anya knew from the headlines from the periphery of Julian's world, but it had never felt real, never had any bearing on her curated life. Until now. What SEC inquiry Anya demanded, stepping forward. She was no longer just a passive victim in a domestic drama. She was an unwilling participant in something far more sinister. "Julian, what is she talking about?" "She's talking nonsense." Julian spat, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist 82 floors in the sky. "She's hysterical. Her brother made some bad investments, and now she's panicking and trying to drag me into it. He was trying to rebuild his wall of composure, but the cracks were showing. His hands were trembling, and a thin sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. Bad investments." Isabel let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Is that what you call it? You used him. Julian, you used my family's brokerage firm as a shield. You ran the entire scheme through their accounts. Made them look like the masterminds while you stayed clean. Scheme." The word was a poison dart. Anya's gaze swung back to Julian. His entire empire, his Midas touch, was it all just a trick? A lie, just like their marriage? "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice low and threatening as he took a step towards Isabel. "And I suggest you leave now before you say something you'll regret." "No." Isabel stood her ground, her chin held high. The fear was still there, but it was now bolstered by a desperate, cornered resolve. "I'm not taking the fall for you. My brother is not going to prison for you. I loved you, Julian, or I thought I did, but I see what you are now. You don't love anyone. You consume them. You use them up, and then you discard the husk." Her eyes flickered to Anya. "She knows." "Don't you?" Anya thought back. The last 6 months, Julian's increasing secrecy, his late nights at the office, which she had assumed were due to his affair, the strange hushed phone calls he would take in his study, ending them abruptly if she walked in. The way he had systematically isolated her, severing her ties to her old friends. Even discouraging visits from her own family, claiming he wanted to protect her peace and privacy during her pregnancy. It hadn't been about protecting her. It had been about isolating a witness. What scheme, Julian Anya's voice was dangerously quiet. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, terrifying calm. "What did you do?" "Anya, listen to me," Julian said, turning to her, his voice attempting a gentleness that now sounded grotesque and manipulative. "She's a scorned woman. She's trying to ruin me because I ended our affair. It's the oldest story in the book. You're my wife. You're the mother of my child. It's you I'm trying to protect." He was trying to play her to use their shared history and their unborn child as a shield. But the spell was broken. She could see the puppeteer's strings. "Protect," she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "By demanding a divorce an hour ago, by calling me a loose end, you needed to tie up. You weren't trying to protect me. You were trying to cut me loose before the ship sank, weren't you? You wanted to make sure I couldn't claim a single cent of your precious, dirty money when it all came crashing down." The truth of it hit her with the force of a physical blow. The divorce wasn't about his love for Isabel. It was a calculated financial maneuver. A preemptive strike in a war he knew was coming. He was willing to make his own pregnant wife a refugee from his life to save himself. "It's called a SPAC," Isabel said, suddenly, her voice sharp and clear. She was no longer speaking just to Julian, but to Anya, to the room, to the universe. She was confessing. "A special purpose acquisition company. It's the cleanest grift on Wall Street right now." Anya had heard Julian talk about SPACs. He'd called them blank check companies, a faster, more efficient way to take a private company, public bypassing the rigorous scrutiny of a traditional IPO. He had launched 3 of them in the last 2 years, raising billions from investors eager to get in on the ground floor of his next big thing. The media had lauded him as an innovator. "Your husband, Isabel," continued her voice, gaining a morbid momentum, "is a master at selling dreams. He would launch a SPAC, promising to merge it with a revolutionary tech company. The hype alone would send the stock soaring. Investors from massive hedge funds to ordinary people would pour their life savings into it all, based on his reputation." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "But there was no company, Anya. There was never any revolutionary tech. It was all smoke and mirrors. A shell game." Julian lunged for her again. "You're lying, am I?" Isabel sidestepped him, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. "Tell her about Project Chimera, Julian. Tell her about the next-gen AI integration platform that was going to change the world. Show her the fancy prospectus, the one with the fabricated data and the photoshopped pictures of a non-existent office in Silicon Valley." She turned back to Anya, her voice dropping. "The money from the investors. It wasn't used for acquisitions. It was funneled, laundered through a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations, one of which was my brother's unwitting firm. Julian would skim off hundreds of millions, paying off early investors with money from new ones to keep the illusion going. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, Anya just dressed up in a fancy Wall Street suit. And the whole thing is about to collapse." Anya stared at Julian, waiting for him to deny it, to rage, to offer some plausible explanation. But he said nothing. He simply stood there, breathing heavily, the cornered animal, the master of the universe, brought low by a single, unraveling thread. The entire foundation of her life, the penthouse, the clothes, the art, the security was not just built on lies, but on theft, on the stolen dreams and life savings of countless unknown people. She felt a dizzying vertigo, the floor seeming to drop away beneath her. Her hand flew to her stomach, to the one pure thing in this world of deceit. This child, her son or daughter, was heir to a fortune that didn't exist, a legacy of shame. So the divorce. Anya trailed off, the full, monstrous picture becoming clear. The settlement you offered me, that generous trust for our peaceful child. Where was that money coming from, Julian? He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the dark, terrifying truth. It's the last of the clean money, isn't it? She whispered in horror. The money you had before all this started. You were trying to firewall it, to put it in my name and the baby's name so the SEC couldn't touch it when they came for the rest. You weren't giving me a gift. You were using your pregnant wife and your unborn child as a money mule. The silence that followed was a confession. It was the most damning sound Anya had ever heard. The man she had married was not just a cheat or a liar. He was a predator of the highest order, and he had just tried to make her his final accomplice. The doorbell chimed, not the private elevator this time, but the main service door to the apartment. A loud, insistent official buzzing. It was a sound none of them could ignore. Julian, Isabel, and Anya all froze, their three-person drama instantly rendered insignificant. This was no longer a private implosion. The outside world was knocking. Julian's eyes, wide with terror, met Anya's. The last shred of his bravado was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man whose time had run out. The buzzing came again, longer this time, more demanding. "Don't answer it," Julian whispered, a desperate, futile command. But Anya was already walking towards the door. The fog of her shock and betrayal was beginning to clear, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had been a pawn in his game for far too long. The game was over. Her hand closed around the cold steel handle of the door. Whatever was on the other side, it was the beginning of her new reality. She had to face it, for herself and for the child she carried. She pulled the door open. Standing in the hallway were two men in dark, conservative suits. They were nondescript, their faces impassive, but they carried an aura of unshakable authority that made the air in the multi-million-dollar penthouse feel cheap and thin. One of them held up a badge and an official-looking document. Julian Croft, the lead agent, asked, his voice calm and professional, but with an underlying steel that tolerated no argument. His eyes flicked past Anya to where Julian stood frozen in the middle of the living room. "I'm Agent Miller with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises." The FBI. The letters seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room. It was one thing to hear the acronym SEC from a panicked mistress. It was another to see the flesh and blood embodiment of a federal investigation standing on your doorstep. Julian looked as if he had been turned to stone. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy grey pallor. He stared at the agents, his mouth slightly agape. The master manipulator suddenly a speechless puppet. Isabel let out a small, choked sob and sank onto one of the ridiculously expensive minimalist sofas, her crimson dress pooling around her like a stain. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by the grim resignation of someone who had pulled the pin on a grenade and was now simply waiting for the blast. Agent Miller and his partner stepped into the apartment, their sensible shoes making solid, real-world sounds on the marble floor. Anya stepped back, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. She was watching a movie of her own life imploding. The agent's eyes swept the room, cataloguing the art, the furniture, the view, not with admiration, but with the cold appraisal of an asset seizure. "We also have a warrant for your arrest." "Mr. Croft." Agent Miller continued in the same dispassionate tone, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. For conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The words were a death sentence, a formal indictment of everything Isabel had just revealed. The Ponzi scheme project, Chimera. The stolen money, it was all real. And now the consequences were real too. "This is a mistake," Julian finally stammered, his voice weak and unconvincing. Your lawyers have been notified." Agent Miller cut him off smoothly. "They can meet you downtown. Please place your hands behind your back." The sight of Julian Croft, the titan of Wall Street, the man whose confident smirk had sold billions in fraudulent dreams, being handcuffed in his own living room, was surreal. The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place was the final definitive sound of his world ending. He didn't resist. The fight was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed shock. As the second agent began to lead Julian towards the door, Isabel suddenly stood up, her face streaked with tears, but her voice filled with a new urgent terror. "Wait!" she cried out, her voice sharp. "That's not all. That's not the real reason." Agent Miller paused, turning to her with a look of mild professional interest. "The real reason for what, ma'am?" "For the divorce," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "For why he had to get her out. It's not just about the money. There's something else. Something worse." Anya, who had been standing silently by the wall, felt a new wave of ice-cold dread. Worse. What could possibly be worse than a billion-dollar fraud that had ruined countless lives? What was the dark secret that even a massive financial crime was meant to cover up? Julian's head snapped up. He shot a look at Isabel, a look of pure murderous rage mixed with desperate pleading. "Isabel, no. Don't. I have to," she sobbed. "They need to know everything. They need to know why you were so desperate." She turned to the agents, her words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed rush. "The SPACs. The fraud. That was the end game. But it started somewhere else. It started with his first company. Gen Tech Solutions." Anya vaguely remembered the name. It was the company Julian had founded before they met the one that had given him his initial millions and launched his reputation as a tech prodigy. He had sold it for a massive profit years ago. "What about it?" Agent Miller asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Gentech's flagship product was a proprietary data encryption software. Isabel explained, her voice gaining clarity as she forced the story out. It was sold to dozens of high-level corporate clients, banks, law firms, private equity funds. They promised impenetrable security. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Anya's. The pity was back in her gaze, but now it was deeper, darker, filled with a horror that Anya couldn't yet comprehend. But it wasn't an encryption software, Anya. It was a key. Julian built a back door into the system, a master key that gave him access to everything. For years he had a live feed into the most sensitive corporate data in the country. Mergers and acquisitions plans, confidential legal strategies, insider trading information. The scale of it was dizzying. Julian hadn't just been a con artist. He had been a digital phantom, a ghost in the machine, systematically stealing the lifeblood of the corporate world. That's how he made his first fortune. Isabel continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It wasn't genius. It was theft on an industrial scale. He knew which companies were going to be acquired before they did. He knew which stocks would soar and which would plummet. He wasn't predicting the market. He was reading the script. The agents exchanged a look. This was new information. This went beyond the SPACs. This was the origin story of his entire criminal enterprise. But that's still not the secret. Isabel choked out, tears streaming down her face again. That's just more fraud. Then what is it? Anya finally spoke, her voice a hollow echo in the room. She had to know. She had to know the final, terrible truth that was poisoning the very air she breathed. Isabel's gaze was fixed on Anya's pregnant belly. 2 years ago, one of the companies he was spying on, a pharmaceutical firm called Biovance, they were on the verge of a major breakthrough, a revolutionary new gene therapy treatment. But they had a problem. Their final human trials were showing some irregularities, dangerous side effects that they were trying to solve before announcing the drug. Julian was now shaking his head violently, his muffled pleas ignored by the agent holding him. "Don't say it, Isabel. Please." Julian knew the drug was flawed. Isabel forged on her voice, cracking with the weight of her confession. He had access to the raw, hidden data. He knew it was dangerous. But he also knew that if another company acquired Biovance, before the flaws were public, the stock would triple overnight. So he used his insider information. He leaked the news of the potential breakthrough without mentioning the dangerous side effects to a rival corporation. They initiated a hostile takeover, and Julian, having bought millions in Biovance stock beforehand, made a fortune. Over $200 million in a single week. That's insider trading. A huge case, but Agent Miller prompted. But it wasn't just insider trading. Isabel screamed, the sound raw and agonizing. The new company, eager to recoup their investment, rushed the drug to market. They buried the flawed data. They pushed it through a compromised approval process. The drug was called Veridia. Anya's blood ran cold. Veridia. The name was a lightning bolt, a searing brand on her memory. It was prescribed as an advanced fertility treatment. Isabel whispered, her eyes locked on Anya's. For couples who had tried everything else, it was hailed as a miracle drug. Anya's hand, the one not pressed against her stomach, flew to her mouth. No, it couldn't be. The room began to spin. The minimalist grey walls seemed to close in on her. She and Julian had struggled to conceive. For 2 years they had been through a heart-breaking cycle of hope and disappointment. Doctors had found no specific issue, just unexplained infertility. Then a year ago, a new specialist, a top doctor recommended by Julian himself, had suggested a new cutting-edge treatment. A miracle drug from Europe, he had called it. Its name was Veridia. Anya stared at Julian, at the man she had married, the man whose child she was carrying, the man who had looked on with what she thought was shared joy when the pregnancy test finally came back positive. But it hadn't been joy. It had been the culmination of a monstrous plan. The side effects, Anya could barely form the words. Her throat was tight with terror. What were the side effects? Julian finally broke. A guttural, animalistic sob tore from his chest. Anya, I'm sorry. I can fix it. We have money. The best doctors. Isabel gave the final brutal answer, her voice devoid of all emotion, a flat line of horror. It worked. The drug allowed women to conceive. That part was true. But the hidden data from the original trials showed that in nearly 80% of cases, the fetus would develop a rare and fatal neurological disorder. Most didn't survive the 3rd trimester. Those who were born didn't live past their 1st year. The world went silent. The agents, the handcuffs, the penthouse, it all dissolved into an indistinct blur. The only thing that was real was the life kicking inside her. A life she had craved, a life she had celebrated, a life that had been conceived through a monstrous lie, a poison given to her by the man she loved. This was the dark secret. The divorce wasn't about protecting his money. It was about severing all ties before his child was born with the fatal condition he himself had knowingly unleashed upon the world. He wasn't trying to disown a wife. He was trying to outrun a death sentence. He was trying to erase the ultimate evidence of his crime, his own dying child. Anya looked at her husband, the father of her child, the architect of her destruction. He was no longer a man. He was a void, a black hole of greed and ambition that had consumed everything, including the life of his own unborn baby. The strength drained from her legs. The room tilted violently, the glittering view of Central Park spinning into a nauseating vortex. As her knees buckled and the world faded to black, the last thing she heard was the distant hollow sound of her own scream. Anya awoke to a world bleached of all color. The first sensation was not sight, but smell. A sharp, aggressive scent of antiseptic that scoured her nostrils and bore no resemblance to the curated peony and old money fragrance of her former life. The second was sound, the soft, insistent, and terrifyingly rhythmic beep of a machine somewhere to her left. For a fleeting, merciful moment, she was adrift in a sea of disorientation, the horrors of the previous evening feeling like the suffocating remnants of a fever dream. Had it been real? The cold words, the crimson dress, the click of handcuffs. Then, with the force of a physical impact, the memories crashed back in. Viridia. The name detonated in her mind a single word that contained a universe of betrayal. It was the name of the drug, the poison, the monstrous lie she had welcomed into her body. A raw, guttural sob tore itself from her throat, and her hand, trembling uncontrollably, flew to her stomach. The gentle, reassuring swell was still there, a fragile vessel in a venomous sea. Was her baby the one pure thing she had left already a ghost? Easy now, Mrs. Croft. Take a deep breath. A calm, steady voice pierced through the fog of her panic. A woman in navy blue scrubs her face, a welcome portrait of professional kindness, was adjusting the IV drip in Anya's arm. You fainted. We brought you straight to Lenox Hill Hospital. We've been monitoring you and the baby. The baby, Anya's voice was a ragged whisper, a thread of sound in the cavernous silence of her fear. She couldn't bring herself to ask the real question, the one that clawed at the inside of her skull. Is it dying? The nurse's eyes softened with understanding. The baby is fine, she said, her words deliberate and clear. A little stressed when you were brought in, but the heartbeat is strong and steady now. Your own heart rate is elevated, which is understandable. You've had a severe shock. The baby is strong. 4 simple words. They were not a cure, not a promise, but they were a lifeline. In the raging flood of her shattered reality, Anya clung to them as if they were the last solid ground on earth. Her baby was a fighter. It was already more than its father had ever been. I need to see a doctor, Anya managed, pushing herself up slightly. The effort made the room spin. A specialist, not just an OB, a geneticist, someone who understands. I need to know everything." Her voice broke on the last word. She needed to know the shape of the monster she was facing. "We've already paged the head of our maternal fetal medicine department, Dr. Elena Ramirez." The nurse reassured her, fluffing a thin pillow behind her head. "She's the best. She'll be here to speak with you shortly. For now, just try to breathe." Rest was an impossible luxury. Her mind was a torture chamber, replaying Julian's face, twisting in panic, the cold finality of the FBI agent's voice, and Isabel's horrified confession over and over. The entire architecture of her life, a magnificent structure she had once admired, had been revealed as a criminal enterprise, a house of cards built on stolen dreams. And the final, most intimate, most unspeakable betrayal was swimming in her very womb, conceived from a miracle that was in truth a time bomb. As the nurse left to give her a moment, another figure appeared hesitantly in the doorway. It was Isabel. She had shed the blood-red dress, the armor of Julian's mistress, and now wore a simple, anonymous pair of jeans and a grey sweater. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the faint purple smudges of exhaustion beneath her eyes. The emerald fire in her irises had been banked, leaving a weary, sorrowful glow. Anya's body tensed. A primal part of her wanted to scream at this woman, the beautiful harbinger of her apocalypse. But the anger felt distant, a secondary emotion, muted by the all-consuming terror of Julian's ultimate sin. Isabel wasn't the enemy. She was just another piece of scorched debris in the blast radius of Julian Croft. "What do you want?" Anya asked, her voice raspy, devoid of accusation, but heavy with exhaustion. I came to see if you were all right," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. She hovered by the door, a respectful distance away, as if acknowledging she was trespassing on sacred ground of grief. "And to tell you, I told them everything." Anya remained silent, watching her. "The agents at the penthouse," Isabel clarified, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "After they took you, I stayed for hours. I told them about Viridia, about the Bio-Vance data, about Julian's back door into Gentech. I gave them the offshore account numbers he'd bragged about, the server locations he thought were hidden. Everything I knew. My brother is working with them too. He's turning over every record from his firm. He's terrified, but he wants to make it right." Why Anya's question was genuine, a flicker of curiosity in the darkness. Why not just disappear? "He would have given you money to run." Isabel finally met her gaze, and Anya saw the profound depth of her self-loathing. Because he was going to let my brother, my family, take the fall for a crime he masterminded. That was the first crack in the fantasy. But the moment I found out about Viridia, the real truth of it, I looked at him, Julian, the man I thought I loved, and I saw a void. It wasn't just greed, Anya. What kind of person knowingly condemns unborn children for profit? It was a level of evil I couldn't comprehend. Her eyes flickered to Anya's stomach. When he told me he was divorcing you, I knew why. He was running from the evidence, from his own child. And I knew you were pregnant, but I didn't know about the drug. Not until my brother's lawyer uncovered the connection. The thought of you, going through the rest of your pregnancy celebrating only to face that. She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't let you be the last one to know the truth. It was the only thing I could do to claw back a single shred of my own soul. In that moment, Anya saw past the affair, past the label of mistress. She saw another woman who had been utterly conned, another life consumed by Julian's insatiable ego. They were bound by a strange, twisted sisterhood forged in the fires of his spectacular destruction. "They've frozen everything." Isabel added her voice, flat and emotionless. "Every asset. The penthouse is a federal crime scene. The accounts are locked. The cars, the art, the watches, it's all gone. Evidence in the largest fraud case in a decade. His lawyers are saying the evidence is insurmountable. He'll never see the outside of a prison cell again." Good, a cold, hard part of Anya thought. Let him rot. But the satisfaction was hollow, a fleeting warmth in an Arctic landscape of pain. Julian's imprisonment couldn't reverse time, couldn't purify the poison. The door opened again, and a woman with intelligent, compassionate eyes and an air of calm authority entered the room. "Mrs. Croft, I'm Dr. Ramirez." With a final lingering look of profound regret, Isabel quietly slipped out of the room, leaving Anya to face her new reality. The next hour was a clinical, terrifying blur of medical terminology, consent forms, and agonizing questions. Dr. Ramirez was a miracle of empathy and professionalism. She explained the process for an advanced diagnostic amniocentesis, carefully and patiently outlining the procedure, the risks, and the stark reality of the potential results. She didn't offer false hope, only facts. And for that, Anya was grateful. "I have to know," Dr. Anya pleaded, her composure finally crumbling under the clinical weight of it all. "Whatever it is, I have to know what I'm facing." "We will get you answers, Doctor," Ramirez promised, her hand briefly resting on Anya's arm. The simple human touch was grounding. "As quickly and as safely as we possibly can." The days that followed were a unique form of purgatory. Anya remained in the hospital, a voluntary prisoner in a sterile white room, while the world outside feasted on the carcass of her old life. The news of Julian's arrest had gone supernova. "Wall Street Wunderkind, or Ponzi King," screamed the cable news chyrons. His smug, handsome face was plastered everywhere, the poster boy for catastrophic hubris. The stories detailed the SPAC's fraud in lurid detail, but the darkest secret, the corporate evil of Viridia, remained a tightly sealed component of the federal case, a horror not yet fit for public consumption. Anya refused all visitors, save for her parents, who flew in immediately, their faces etched with a pain that mirrored her own. She hired a team of lawyers, not to fight for a share of Julian's blood money, but to meticulously expunge him from her life. To dissolve the marriage, to legally and financially firewall her child from the toxic Croft name and its indelible legacy of shame. She existed in a state of suspended animation, the week-long wait for the test results stretching into an eternity. She didn't sleep, she merely drifted in and out of consciousness. In her waking hours, she would stare out the window at the city, a city that now seemed alien to her. Every pregnant woman she saw, every baby in a stroller was a stab to the heart. She was suspended between a life that was over and a future that was too terrifying to contemplate. Finally, the day came. Dr. Ramirez entered her room alone, closing the door softly behind her. She held a file, and her expression was calm, professional, and utterly unreadable. Anya's heart began to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. This was it, the precipice. She gripped her own hands over her belly, a protective gesture that felt painfully inadequate. Dr. Ramirez sat in the chair beside the bed, opened the file but didn't look at it. She looked directly at Anya. "We have the results from the full genomic sequencing panel," she said, her voice even. Anya held her breath, bracing for the impact for the words that would shatter the final fragments of her world. Dr. Ramirez took a slow, deliberate breath. "Anya, your baby is perfectly healthy." The words didn't register. They were a language she had forgotten how to speak. Anya just stared at her, her mind a blank slate of incomprehension. "What, no? That's not possible." "Viridia, the neurological degradation." "I know," the doctor said gently, her professional calm finally breaking into a warm, reassuring smile. "We read the federal case files your lawyers managed to get unsealed for us. We knew the exact rare genetic markers we were looking for, and they are not there. We ran the test twice to be certain. He is completely, unequivocally unaffected. He." Her mind snagged on the word. "He. You're having a son." Anya Dr. Ramirez confirmed, her eyes shining. "A healthy baby boy." The dam broke. A sound, a wail that was equal parts grief and joy, tore from deep inside her. It was the sound of a week of terror, of months of unknowing, of a lifetime of betrayal, being washed away by a single miraculous wave of relief. The tears came, then hot and cleansing, pouring down her face as she finally truly let go. But how she sobbed, her body shaking. Isabel said, 80%. 80% is not 100%, the doctor said, softly, her voice thick with emotion. It means 20%, 1 in 5 were spared. It's a game of Russian roulette, played with the most precious stakes imaginable. It's a monstrous, unforgivable gamble. But Anya, you and your son, you won. She won. It wasn't a victory over Julian. It was a victory over fate, over poison, over the darkness that had tried to claim her future. Anya checked out of the hospital the next morning. The world looked different, the colors more vibrant, the air cleaner. The Julian Croft penthouse on Park Avenue was sealed a monument to a dead life. She walked away from it without a backward glance. With a small, life-saving loan from her parents, she found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn's Park Slope. It was a world away from the silent, sterile grandeur she had known. From her window, she saw not a curated park, but a living one. She could hear the joyful shrieks of children playing, the friendly bark of dogs, the distant, reassuring rumble of the F-train. It was the chaotic, beautiful symphony of real life. She spent the final peaceful months of her pregnancy rebuilding. She bought a second-hand crib and painted the nursery a cheerful, sunny yellow. She reconnected with her old circle of wonderfully messy, artistic friends who enveloped her in a cocoon of unconditional love and support, never once mentioning her notorious past. They brought her soup, helped her assemble furniture, and made her laugh, truly laugh for the first time in years. 3 months later, Leo Alexander was born, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. He was loud, demanding, and utterly perfect. He had her eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair. Holding him for the first time, skin to skin, feeling his tiny, fragile fingers instinctively curl around hers. Anya felt a love so vast and powerful it rearranged her entire universe. This was real wealth. This was a legacy. One rainy afternoon as a 2-week-old, Leo slept soundly on her chest. A news alert popped up on her phone. Julian Croft sentenced. She read that faced with an avalanche of evidence and Isabel's unshakable testimony, He had accepted a plea bargain to avoid having the full horrific details of the Viridia scandal made public in a trial. He was sentenced to 150 years in a federal supermax facility with no possibility of parole. Anya looked down at her sleeping son, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. She felt no hatred for Julian, no desire for revenge. She felt nothing at all. He was a ghost, the antagonist of a story that was already over. Her story and Leo's was just beginning. Her life was no longer defined by the man she had lost, but by the son she had almost lost and had miraculously gained. She was not the millionaire's disgraced wife. She was Leo's mother, and in the quiet, sun-drenched world of her small Brooklyn apartment, she was the richest woman in the world. Anya's story is a harrowing journey from a gilded cage to true freedom. It's a reminder that wealth can be a mask for unimaginable darkness, and that true strength isn't found in penthouses or designer clothes, but in the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. She lost a life of luxury, but gained a life of purpose, proving that even after the most devastating betrayals, we have the power to rise from the ashes and build a new world for ourselves and for our children. Her story isn't just about the downfall of a wicked man, but the rise of an unbreakable woman. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of drama, resilience, and ultimate justice. Let us know in the comments what you think of Anya's incredible journey.